I'm Reverend Mary Shelton. I am the community spiritual leader here. I'm happy to see you all. I know some people may still be out gathering their picnic things for after the service, which is going to be about 300 meters out that way. Right after the service, you can get there through the parking lot or down the walkway. And we're looking forward to doing that. If you're here for the first time, you'll get a bigger welcome later. But I do want to say we're delighted that you're here. And whoever you are, wherever you may be on your pathway of faith, you're welcome here. So we look forward to having you with us again in the future, and we're very grateful that you're with us right now. So July, the month of July, has been the month of freedom of thought and expression, and we've talked a lot about freedom of thought this month in terms of allowing a diversity of thought in our experience and to welcome that which is new to us. Sometimes the diversity of thought happens because we misunderstand each other. So we take something somebody says in a particular way that isn't actually what they meant, but we don't know that at the time. Anybody ever had that happen? And then sometimes it's embarrassing afterwards when you find out what they really meant, or it's embarrassing when you find out what the other person thought you meant. This is a story like that. A truck driver was on his way to deliver 100 penguins to the New York Zoo when his truck broke down on the freeway. And he got out of the cab and was looking at the engine when a second truck driver stopped in front of him and asked if he needed any help. And the driver explained that he was taking these penguins to the zoo, and he asked if the other man would take the penguins there for him. And because he had an empty truck, he said yes, he agreed. And so some hours went by, and the second truck driver was again driving past the first one, who was still waiting for on the freeway for a tow to come and help him out. The penguins, however, were still on the truck. And the first driver shouted at him, "I thought I asked you to take those penguins to the zoo." Second replied, "I did, but I had some money left over, so now we're going to the movies." Yeah, okay. Sometimes we don't quite understand what the other person meant. And so that happens sometimes too, doesn't it, with our freedom of expression. You know, the freedom to express means that we have a choice in how we're going to show up in the world. And we have a choice about how we express our thoughts and our feelings and our beliefs and our opinions in ways that sometimes just go beyond just words or just thoughts. Would you agree? So we have a choice of expression in terms of art, and art can be all different modes. It can be the visual arts, but it also can be music and dance and theater and architecture and, you know, pretty much you name it. We have a choice of studies or a choice of profession or a choice of means of creatively expressing and earning income in the world. We have a choice of our politics, how we think government should work, what we think it should do or not do. We have a choice of those things. And we have a choice of religion, the freedom to believe whatever we want to believe or not to believe anything at all. Those are freedoms of our expression, and it's important that we have those. It's important that we have those, and it's also important that we make space for those, even support and welcome, encourage, and stand up for those whose expression is not the same as ours. So if we're going to really be free, we have to also, in our freedom, it has to be included that we have the freedom to make mistakes and be wrong, that we have the freedom to offend, not necessarily that that's our intention, but that we aren't locked down too unreasonably in that we have the freedom to explore and invent and create and discover for ourselves, not just based on what somebody else has done and told us about. We have the freedom to grow, to change our minds, to make amends, to be forgiven, to be different from everybody else. Those freedoms allow us to be what we were created to be by the infinite, which is a unique expression of the one. And so if we were like everybody else, if we all agreed, if we were that homogeneous in the way that we behaved and viewed the world and where we came from and the languages we spoke and the music we sang and the art we created, we would be so boring. And we would not be a fair expression of the great diversity and possibilities of the Spirit. So when we are trying to support someone, we wind up in this position of, I disagree with you, but I support your right to express. And that is not easy. So in the Gospel of Matthew, it says this: do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck or the splinter that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, here, let me take this twig out of your eye, when behold, the log is still in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Now, the interesting thing about that is it sounds kind of harsh, first of all, but secondly, the very next verse after that, he says, do not cast your pearls before swine, which is referring to other people. That sounds a bit judgmental. When you say, I mean, as a Jew, swine are not necessarily the highest held in regard as the creatures of the earth. So what I'm seeing, and I don't believe he said these things at the same time, and he may have not even said them in quite this way, but I think that the message here is that even Jesus judged other people sometimes. You know, his own message, when it came from that high consciousness, was make space for each other. Don't judge each other without tending to your own prejudices, your own blind spots, your own unreasonableness about other people. Tend to those first before you criticize somebody else. And yet, sometimes it's hard to live what you believe is the right thing. Do you ever find that you disagree with somebody so much it's really hard to make space for them at all? Sometimes for me it's actually almost physically painful to be in that kind of a conversation. Partly because I want to make space for them, and also because I feel so upset about what's been said or is being said. And I think that we tend to feel that upset within us when a boundary of ours or something we value highly seems to be not being valued by somebody else. That we find like a boundary has been crossed, or we've been impeded or stepped on or intruded on somehow. Can you relate to this? And so I really admire this fellow. His name is Chris Patton. He says, I believe in trying to get a balance between individual freedom on the one hand and social responsibility on the other. Trying to find a balance between those two. And you know, balance is not a static state. It isn't like we get it and then we've got it. It's a constant readjustment to bringing into balance what isn't in balance or what is shifting out of balance. Does that make sense? So we need to be able to find a way to both make space for other people in our social responsibility in the world and in a certain level of responsibility about our own freedom. That freedom comes with responsibility. So it's rights and responsibilities. They come together. We don't get licensed to do anything we want. Ernest Holmes tells us that, you know, being creative and having the creative law to work with, that doesn't mean we have license to do whatever we want. Because if we choose to take actions that are not in alignment with that law of creation, that law of wholeness, they're going to come back and bite us at some point. Because we've put this negativity out there, and it has to go somewhere. You know, if you drop a pebble in the lake, the ripples, they look like they all go out. which they do. But what also happens is that when they encounter each other or the shore, they ripple back along those same ripples back to where they started from. So they're moving in both directions at once. We just notice the outward ripples usually. So when we are respecting somebody else's freedom as important as our own, we also have to balance that with our own freedom and responsibility to not abandon ourselves, to not abandon our own perspective and point of view in allowing somebody else to have theirs. And that is difficult. To also, in our freedom, to refrain from inciting violence or something that would harm another or other people. I was thinking this morning about the commandment that says, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Usually we interpret that as meaning thou don't lie. But actually, it might mean don't testify against somebody else in court and tell lies about them. It could just mean that. Or if we broaden it out to the way we live today, it could mean like internet bullying. Don't make stuff up online about somebody that isn't true. So we can take that and narrow it down a whole bunch, or we can expand it out. But I think that when we look at our own freedom, we have a responsibility to say, how do I hold both of us in respect? How do I look for a win-win in this conversation or this relationship? How do I look for both and rather than either or? What is a way forward from here? And it's a difficult proposition. Part of our balancing our freedom with responsibility is that we choose to be, as much as we can be, congruent in our behavior as well as what we say. So, no, it isn't do what I say and not what I do. No. That's a mismatch. And I can't claim to be perfectly balanced myself, or that I always will be. But the idea is that what you say and who you are in the world can be trusted, because you are the same person in what you say as you are in what you do. Does this make sense? So we look at the golden rule. Now this was done by Norman Rockwell. It says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is from the Christian gospel. But also, it comes from nearly every major faith in the world in some version or another. So in the Baha'i faith, which is an offshoot of Islam, and if thine eyes be turned toward justice, choose thou for thy neighbor what thou choosest for thyself. In Hinduism, this is the sum of duty. Do not to others, which if done to thee, would cause thee pain. In Judaism, from the Talmud, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow men. That is the entire law. All the rest is commentary. From Zoroastrianism, whatever is disagreeable to yourself, do not do unto others. Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. The Christian one is from the Gospel of Luke. In Islam, from the Hadith, not one of you is a believer until he desires for his brother that which he desires for himself. And Socrates said, do not do to others what would anger you if done to you by others. And from the Wiccan Rede, and it harm none, do what you will. And it harm none. That's a big if. So when we come to interacting with other people, what we want to bring to it is to seek first. Now this comes from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. To seek first to understand. It also comes from, the prayer of St. Francis. But to seek first to understand and then to be understood. To aim and think win-win. And those are huge adjustments for us to make, both and. When we seek first to understand, Stephen Covey says, we're thinking together. We're actually we're looking together at the problem, and the problem is over there, that disagreement we're having. But we're over here looking at it saying, what might be true on both sides of this? How can we find a good center point that doesn't cause either of us to feel we have to give up or surrender, but actually creates a higher possibility, a third alternative? How can we look for that? He says, when we are thinking win-win, when we're thinking both and, we're thinking from an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset. An abundance mindset that says there is a step above this. There is a higher place to take a view from and to go there. When we see the world, we don't see the world like all other creatures do. So we are, as human beings, trichromats, which means we have 3 cones in our eyes that allow us to differentiate colors and wavelengths. And we can differentiate a certain range of wavelengths. That's what we see. And because we're trichromats, we see those in color. There are vibrations above and below the range that we see that some other creatures can see or perceive. But those are the ones that we see. So when you look at this tiger, you would think, looking at it, that if you were in the jungle and a tiger was approaching you, it would be really obvious, right? Because of the contrast between the orange tiger and the green of the jungle. Does that make sense? But other than the majority of primates and monkeys and human beings, most other mammals are not trichromats, they're dichromats. So they only see things in shades of yellow and blue, which means that what they see is a yellow and black tiger against a yellow and black background. So this tiger, for them, is camouflaged. Does that make sense? So I want to take that as a metaphor for the way that we see each other and see things in the world, that we don't actually know from the other person's context and experience what it is that their minds are seeing, feeling, hearing, interpreting out of their whole lifespan that is not the same as ours. We don't know what that is, and vice versa. So making space for each other and trying to discover what that is important, and it doesn't mean we're always going to come up with a solution. This is a story that took place in the 1990s about the abortion debate. In the morning of December 30th, 1994, John Salvi walked into the Planned Parenthood clinic in Brookline, Massachusetts, and opened fire with a rifle. He seriously wounded 3 people and killed the receptionist, Shannon Lowney, as she spoke on the phone. And then he ran to his car, drove 2 miles down Beacon Street to Preterm Health Services, where he began shooting again, injuring 2 and killing that receptionist, Leanne Nichols. Pro-choice advocates were grief-stricken, angry, and terrified. Pro-life proponents were appalled as well as concerned that their cause would be connected with this horrifying act. Governor William Weld and Cardinal Bernard Law, among others, Bernard Law has since fallen from grace, but this was in '94, among others, called for talks between pro-choice and pro-life leaders. So this article says, we are 6 leaders, 3 pro-choice and 3 pro-life, who answered this call. In the months following the shootings, the Public Conversations Project, a Boston-based national group that designs and conducts dialogues about divisive public issues, consulted many community leaders about the value of top-level talks about abortion. And encouraged by these conversations, they invited the 6 of us to meet together 4 times. The meetings would be confidential, and we would attend as individuals, not as representatives of our organizations. Our talks would not aim for common ground or compromise. Instead, the goals of our conversations would be to communicate openly with our opponents away from the polarizing spotlight of the media, to build relationships of mutual respect and understanding, to help de-escalate the rhetoric of abortion controversy, and of course to reduce the risk of future shootings. As we approached the first meeting, we were all apprehensive. That first discussion was grueling. We could not agree on what to call each other. Pro-life, pro-choice, neither one liked the title of the other. We also struggled over how to refer to what grows and develops in a pregnant woman's womb. These opening exchanges brought us to the heart of our differences. Nerves frayed. The chasm between us seemed huge. To help us listen and speak across this divide, ground rules were critical. Despite the strains of these early meetings, we grew closer to each other. At one session, each of us told the group why she had devoted so much of her time and energy and talents to the abortion issue. These accounts, all deeply personal, enlightened and moved us. After the fourth meeting, we agreed to extend our sessions through the one-year anniversary of the shootings, an occasion we feared where tensions over abortion might ignite Boston. On the evening of December 30th, 1995, about 700 people gathered at Temple Ohabe Shalom in Brookline to honor the memory of those killed. All our pro-choice participants attended the service. In the solemn crowd were one of our facilitators and two of our pro-life members, one with her husband. Seeing the other members of the group walk in was one of the most meaningful moments of the service for me, said one of the pro-choice participants. By the time of this sad anniversary, each one of us had come to think differently about those on the other side. While we struggled over profound issues, we also kept track of personal events in one another's lives, celebrating good times and sharing sorrows. As our mutual understanding increased, our respect and affection for one another grew. This increased understanding affected how we spoke as leaders of our respective movements. A growing trust opened a hotline, a clear channel of reliable communication between us. The pro-life leaders alerted the pro-choice leaders when there was a possibility of imminent physical danger. I want to say that again. The pro-life leaders alerted the pro-choice leaders when there was a possibility of imminent physical danger to them. And one of them said, "It lowered my anxiety and moved me deeply to know that there were people on the other side who were concerned about my safety." These conversations revealed a deep divide. We saw that our differences on abortion reflect two worldviews that are irreconcilable. If this is true, why do we continue to meet? First, because when we face our opponent, we see her dignity and goodness. So these were all women. Embracing this apparent contradiction stretches us spiritually. We've experienced something radical and life-altering that we describe in non-political terms: the mystery of love, holy ground, or simply mysterious. Since that first fear-filled meeting, we've experienced a paradox. While learning to treat each other with dignity and respect, we have all become firmer in our views about abortion. We hope this account of our experience will encourage people everywhere to consider engaging in dialogues about abortion and other protracted disputes. In this world of polarizing conflicts, we have glimpsed a new possibility. This is the third way. A way in which people can disagree frankly and passionately, become clearer in mind and heart about their activism, and at the same time contribute to a more civil and compassionate society. Who would have thought that something like this would have been possible at all? So the question we come to then is, who really frees whom? Who sets who free? Whose responsibility is it? It's our responsibility, certainly as a community, as a global world, as countries, as churches, as whatever kinds of organizations we are. There is a word in the African tradition that is Ubuntu. And its literal meaning is, I am because you are. I exist with all of my uniqueness because you do. If you were not you, I would not be the same person that I am. I am fully me because you exist as you are. Ubuntu. This is another way of saying namaste. You know, the Sanskrit greeting that's exchanged in India, which is the God in me bows to the God in you. So on the 4th of July in 1937, our founder, Ernest Holmes, wrote an article, and this is part of it. True freedom, he said, true liberty has something cosmic behind it. If the time has come that modern science has proved that we cannot move a piece of paper without changing the balance of the entire physical universe, if we have come to the place where we know that the stuff of our physical bodies is made of the same stuff of which the planets are made, if we have come to the place where such a profound unity is maintained by physicists that they believe there is no such thing as disunity in the physical world, then we can easily see what the great spiritual leaders of the ages meant when they told us of that greater unity in which we all live and move and have our being, and that the idea of freedom itself is tied up with the true concept of the unity of good. If our nature is one, if God is one, and we know that God must be one, for the universe cannot be divided against itself, then we are all tied to an indivisible unity. We shall have to get back to this unity to find the meaning of freedom. Nothing in any part of this cosmic whole could be considered freedom that would destroy the liberty of some other part of it. That would be self-destruction, would it not? As Jesus pointed out 2,000 years ago, that would be a kingdom divided against itself. The kingdom of God is one kingdom, so we know that true liberty must spring from true unity. And so what I'm saying is something that I don't actually want to hear this morning. What I'm saying is that I need to stand on level ground and make space for that which is as unlike my perspective and opinion as I can imagine, and make space to assume a respectful, inclusive attitude toward other perspectives that could be wildly different from my own. To take the twigs out of my own eye, the splinters out of my own eye, and the logs out of my own eye, to see others more clearly. I want to invite you to join with me in this practice, in this very difficult, steep practice, in claiming our own freedom. We claim it for everyone. And I'll close with this quote from our founder, Ernest Holmes, from his seminal book, The Science of Mind. God in me is unified with God in all, not some. God in all. I am one with all people, all things, all life. As I listen in the silence, the voice of humanity speaks to me and answers the love that I hold out to it. Let us hold out love to each other and then extend it out in ripples from there. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm going to invite Bodhi. Is Amanda joining you or no?